Welcome to the Atheists of Florida YouTube channel. We are pleased to offer some of the most significant speakers and profound issues of our times. If you like today's video, please hit the like button. If you have already subscribed, thank you. If not, you know what to do.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. I can only see a handful of faces on my screen right now, so hopefully you can hear me okay. You can see me okay. Thank you to Judy. Thank you to Atheists of Florida. We've been trying to do this for a while, so I'm glad we could finally work it out. And hopefully next time I'll get to see you in person. Like I said, there'll be time for questions when we're done. So if you have any while I'm talking, like write them down, type them out somewhere, and we'll get to them afterwards. But basically, what I was hoping to talk to you about is the question you're seeing on your screen, the question of whether atheism is this taboo in politics. And let me start off with a few caveats here, if I can get this. There we go. A few caveats before we really get into this, because I think we need to clear them up right across, right off the bat. First is, this is not a partisan speech. I know it's a nonprofit group. This is not a partisan speech, but with the examples I'm giving, it's going to feel very much like it is. And I'll talk about why that's the case later on. The second thing is, I'm not even saying we necessarily need atheists in political office. There's a value to that, which I'll talk about, but this is not me advocating to say we need to have atheists and only atheists in office. There are like really good progressive Christians you could support for a lot of positions, and I've voted for them in the past. I will do so again. But the main reason I want to talk about this is because symbolism matters. This was like an incoming crop of freshman House representatives a couple of years ago. And the thing that really stood out to me in this picture is you actually see some diversity there that you never really saw much of in Congress before that. And there is a lot of value. It matters when you have a Muslim representative or a transgender state representative in ways that go beyond, identity politics or anything like that. And this is where I think it really matters to have atheists in public office. So let me ask you all just this rhetorical question, because I know we can't have this conversation back and forth, but raise your hand, I guess, on the screen. If you have ever told someone you are an atheist only to have them respond to you with something like, "Oh, but I thought you were a good person," or something like that. And of course, we all know, thank you for the electronic hand. That's good. We know the reason for that. Well, the reason for that is because people have this stigma against atheists, as if we are these immoral people that, can't do good. And we know that's wrong. And we can do a lot we have for years worked to try to change that stigma. But let me give you an example of how this actually comes into play. Last year, the Pew Research Center did a really interesting survey where, among the many things they asked people, they asked, who is the first person who comes to your mind when you think of the word atheist, or when you think of atheism? And let me just give you a few seconds. I mean, who would you answer to that question? Who comes to your mind when you hear the word atheism or atheist? And I'm talking about a singular person. See if I could, there we go. And I'll start you off. This is the boilerplate. You could see on this slide, 51% of people couldn't give an answer. Most people could not think of anybody who was an atheist. 26% said some one-off individual, maybe someone like Bill Maher, the comedian, Ricky Gervais, someone who they knew was an atheist, but those were in relatively small numbers, the people who, without prompting, gave those names. And you can also see on there, 10% of people said the first person who comes to mind when I think of atheist is myself or my family or some acquaintance of mine, someone I know personally. But when it comes to single names, here was number 3 on the list. This is Madalyn Murray O'Hair. I'm sure most of you are familiar with her, the founder of American Atheists. And like, I get why she would be a name that comes up in people's minds, but also she was killed like 25 years ago. And I'm not saying that to denigrate that in any way. I'm saying she hasn't been around for 25 years. And like, how many people have taken that place in people's minds when it comes to atheists? So who's number 2 on the list, do you think? Number 2 on the list is Richard Dawkins. 4% of people. Richard Dawkins was the first person whose name came to mind. I think that is self-explanatory. Honestly, I would argue, I don't know if that does us many favors, but okay, I do understand that. I do get why people would think of Richard Dawkins when it comes to atheism. So here's the $1,000,000 question. Who's number 1 on the list? If it's not those two, who is the most famous atheist? At least got the plurality of single names. Who was number 1 on that list? Here's the answer. Satan. 6% of people said Satan was the first thing they thought of when they heard of atheists, which I know is super ironic when it comes to all the things we're talking about here. But here's my point. If you talk about the people they're thinking of, obviously Satan, silly, but obviously epitome of evil. Richard Dawkins, who, whatever you want to think of him, is not really known for having a like happy, cheerful attitude. Madeleine Murray O'Hair was famously angry and combative, and maybe you like that, but that is the reputation. And the argument here is, when it comes to people with this positive public image, we don't really have that in the public imagination. They're not thinking of someone who represents, I don't know, on a broader scale, someone who changed the world for the better. Like if you ask Muslims who they think of, Malala came to mind. If you ask Christians, evangelical Christians, who they thought of, it was the late Billy Graham, who, again, I have plenty of criticisms, but he was known as a good guy, stereotypically, and not like a culture warrior like we would know today. But again, we don't necessarily have that public reputation. And here's the argument I want to make to all of you. It would be really nice if people could think of an atheist who was known for doing things that were awesome to a large swath of people, and not have names that make a lot of people cringe. You know, when you think of a stand-up comedian, Bill Maher, or Ricky Gervais, and they talk about religion, they're not doing it to win over the hearts and minds of the religious. They're making fun of it. And I will freely admit, I usually like that type of humor, but it's not winning us any new fans, obviously. And even if you think of the famous, new atheist authors, people like Dawkins, their books are really focused on why religion is wrong, or why, you should stop believing in God. And again, there is value to that, but they're not trying to win over the other side. They're trying to argue against the other side. And this, I would argue, this is why politics really should matter to atheists as a movement in a way I don't think we've really grappled with just yet. And here's why. When you are in government, at least in theory, you are fighting to help everybody if you're doing it well. I would argue it's probably the most highest profile place where you could have an atheist who's known as an atheist, whose job is not advocating atheism. It might be one of the only places to see a quote unquote respectable atheist in public life, in a place where trashing religion is not the thing that they do. And I think that more than anything else would change the reputation atheists have, that we are, immoral, untrustworthy, take your pick. Imagine if the most well-known atheist in the country was someone who fought hard for the social safety net, or voting rights, or reproductive freedom, or LGBTQ rights. What would that do for groups like yours? What would that do if we didn't have to play defense all the time and try to convince people, no, we are good people. Look at the volunteer work we do. Look at the amazing things our volunteers are doing. We always have to play defense because we're fighting against a stigma. What if we didn't have to do that all the time? That would be kind of nice. I'm going to show you this cover of a magazine And I know you can't see the fine print here. This is from the New Republic, but look at the cover. It says the last taboo. Politicians keep saying we should inject more religion into our public life, but what we really need is a healthy dose of atheism. That's kind of cool. When's the date on that cover of that magazine? Can you see that? I don't know if you can or not. That magazine is from 1996. We're talking Bill Clinton, Bob Dole election time. We're talking about like 1996, Wendy Kaminer was saying atheism is the last taboo, which I have to admit is a little weird because at the time we didn't have a black president. We did not even have a female nominee for president, much less openly LGBTQ officials. But I do want to point out one thing she wrote in the article that I thought really nailed it. Check this out. Atheists generate about as much sympathy as pedophiles. Try to imagine an avowed atheist running successfully for public office. It's hard enough, she said, for politicians to oppose prayer in schools. When politicians proclaim their belief in God, regardless of their religion, they're signaling their trustworthiness, which totally true. By declaring your belief, you imply that an omnipotent, omniscient, and benign force is the source of your values and ideas. And again, this is, I think, the core, and we are still struggling with this today. If you find out someone's an atheist, or I should say, if the public finds out someone's an atheist, we know the immediate things they think of: untrustworthy, lack of a moral core. These are not decent people. That's what the public tends to think. And I'll show you how this, I mean, I know you've seen versions of this image before. This one's a joke, but it's not, the core of it's not false. There are 7 states in red here where the state constitutions have a line in them saying you cannot hold public office unless you believe in God. Now, none of those statutes are enforceable. We have no religious test for political office, so they don't count. But those 7 states still have that written in there. Why? Because when those constitutions were written, it was not a controversial thing to say you got to believe in God. Otherwise, you can't hold this, honorable position in politics. And the thing is, because constitutions are so hard to change, even attempts at changing that wording in those states, they haven't happened, because it's really hard to be the politician who says, I want to change this and just, make it up to date. It's really hard to do that. Let me give you one more example.
Is it banned or not?
It is not. It's legally, even though it's in the Constitution and it says you have to believe in God to hold higher office. If an atheist were to win higher office and they got elected to higher office, that statute
So they're
in the
allowed.
Constitution is not legal.
They're allowed to run, though.
They are absolutely.
We're going to
Okay.
have questions after
Sure.
after he finishes his talk, please.
Thank you. But yes, to answer that one question, yes, they are allowed to run. They're allowed to win office, even in those states. I mean, good luck getting elected as an open atheist in those states. But yes, if you won, you could hold office. That's we could talk about the challenges to that, because there have been many. But again, the point is that's the stigma we're up against. And sometimes they etch it into what they think is stone. And let me show you how this actually plays out in reality. I showed you that magazine cover. That's from 96. Let me show you what happened in 2008. Okay, so Barack Obama is running for president. And in North Carolina, there was a Senate race. It was an open seat. And there were 2 women who were running on the Democratic and Republican side. And that's one of the reasons this was a race that was covered by the national media, because it was not often that you saw 2 women running for a Senate seat. On the Democratic side, you had Kay Hagan, who was a state representative who was running for Senate. And on the other side, 2008, you had Elizabeth Dole, the wife of the former Republican presidential candidate. And here's the reason I bring this up. In 2008, Kay Hagan on the left on your screen was not an atheist. I think she was a Sunday school teacher, to be honest with you. But she went to a fundraiser hosted by a guy who was an atheist. And I want to show you a campaign ad that the Dole campaign ran against Kay Hagan. So that is your setup. And honestly, That's all you need to know. She went to a fundraiser at the home of someone who has donated to like secular causes and groups like American Atheists, the Secular Coalition for America, places like that. Here's the ad she actually ran. Elizabeth Dole ran.
We can't hear it. Hemant,
I can hear it.
I can't hear it either.
If you can't hear that, I'll summarize the gist of it. They basically used atheist talking points, things like, oh, this is what certain atheist groups would like to do if they could separate church and state. They said Kay Hagan went to the fundraiser of an atheist. What did she promise in return? I promise you the answer is nothing. Like she wasn't doing us any favors or anything like that. But this is an ad that did not attack Kay Hagan's policy positions or anything like that. They attacked atheists because there was a loose tie to an atheist fundraiser, and that was it. They tried to hammer her on that. And again, I will tell you the happy ending to that particular story, which is that Kay Hagan still won that race. And Elizabeth Dole actually got pushback. Like, why would you go after Kay Hagan when she's not an atheist? She's not pushing whatever the people on the screen were pushing in those out of context clips. Why would you do that? And the Dole campaign did not have a good answer for that. But the point is, it was seen as a political slam dunk by the Dole campaign to say, we have a reason she's tied to atheists. Let's use that against her. They thought that would be an easy thing for them to do because, of course, everyone hates atheists. If there's any way to tie her to atheists, we could try to use that. It didn't work, thankfully, but at the time, it was still considered pretty powerful. And I think that's what Wendy Kaminer was talking about when she talked about atheism being the last taboo in politics. And just to give you some numbers here, in 1996, when she wrote that article, there were 0 open atheists in Congress. In 2006, and this is right before this particular election, in 2006, when the God Delusion had come out, and Sam Harris's The End of Faith had come out, and Christopher Hitchens' book maybe was on the verge of coming out, and that whole new atheism thing was happening, you would think that, okay, now it's not as scary to be an atheist in public. And yet the thing I'm talking about with Kay Hagan happened years after that. You know what I mean? And so at the time, I happened to be working with a group called the Secular Coalition for America, which is a lobbying group in DC, basically fighting for church-state separation and things like that. There was a discussion on our side of the fence basically saying, who is the highest ranking elected atheist anywhere in the country in public office? I mean, can we think, this is a group of politically minded people, can we figure out who the most prominent atheist is in public office? And the answer we all got was like, we really can't think of anybody. You know, best case scenario, maybe, I don't know, Dick Cheney's a secret atheist and none of us knows it, which I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but maybe that's true. But on the flip side, what if it turns out the highest ranking atheist in the country is like a local dog catcher somewhere? Because that would also kind of prove a point, which is that it's really hard to get elected as an atheist. And that is something we want to talk about. We want to have that conversation. So David Neosi, who's written a couple excellent books, he had an idea. Why don't we run a contest? We'll give you $1,000 if you can identify the highest ranking atheist, humanist, free thinker in the country who is elected. But here's the trick. Here's the catch. They have to be open about it. They can't secretly be an atheist. They have to be out about it. And we thought, like, again, it's a win-win situation for us, because if it turns out to be someone high-ranking in Congress, we should talk about that. And if it's low-ranking, we should have that conversation too, right? And at the time, I was like, who would be an option? One name that came to mind, I don't know if I have a picture here. Yeah, this is Ernie Chambers, who is a state legislator in Nebraska. He is the longest serving legislator in Nebraska's unicameral legislature, been there for like, I don't know, 40 plus years. He's been there so long, he got term limited out and then ran as soon as he could again, and he won. And I think he just got term limited out for the second time, like a year ago or something. But this guy's known for being outspoken and progressive. He's spent decades trying to eliminate the death penalty in the state of Nebraska. And I really like Ernie Chambers because sometimes just to prove a point, he will do publicity stunts, but in very unusual ways. This is from 2007, but he filed a lawsuit against God to seek a permanent injunction ordering God to stop harmful activities and making terroristic threats. I don't remember what that was in response to, but the point is, I'm going to sue God because everyone keeps invoking God's name to do all this stuff. And I think they tossed this lawsuit out because God could not be found to serve papers to appear in court or something like that. But here's the thing. Ernie Chambers wasn't an atheist. He has said over and over, I do not use that label atheist. I am not any-ist. You know, he is an open, independent guy. He doesn't like the label, so he doesn't count. So here we go. Like, there's nobody we can figure out. And then finally, after searching for a while, we find out someone has said, my congressman is an atheist. And so we send his congressman a questionnaire saying, like, you know, are you open about this? Do you believe in God? Are you okay with us saying this? And it turned out one guy said, I'm a Unitarian, but I don't believe in God. And I'm okay with you saying this publicly. And I think the reason he said that is because he had been in office forever. He wasn't in danger of losing his seat. And it turned out this guy, his name is Pete Stark. He was a congressman from California. He was the highest ranking guy we could find in office. And I should say, he wasn't just a random congressman either. He was a senior member of the House Ways and Means Committee. He was a chair of the Health Subcommittee. He was a pretty high ranking Democrat. And he allowed us to go public with the fact that, yes, he's a Unitarian, but he does not believe in God. So even when there was a financial incentive on the table, what did we get out of that? One person out of 538 in Congress. And that's kind of it. And that's all we could find. Here's a little side note that you all might find a little interesting. He, in 2012, do you remember, have you seen this guy on television, Eric Swalwell? He's a Democrat from California. He was big on TV during the Mueller investigation. He ran for president for all of, I don't know, 3 seconds last year as a Democrat. Do you know how he got his seat? In 2012, he primaried Pete Stark. He was like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez back in the day. He had to primary Pete Stark, and he ended up beating Pete Stark in the primary in a seat that was safely blue. But let me show you something. When he was running in 2012, it turned out Pete Stark, on the 10th anniversary of 9/11, there was some sort of resolution on the floor that said, you know, can we reaffirm the American motto, in God we trust? Very symbolic gesture. It was actually passed 398 to 9. And Pete Stark, the open atheist now, was one of, or the open Unitarian who doesn't believe in God, was one of the 9. And so this is what Eric Swalwell said during his primary. Do we trust Pete Stark to represent our views? And if you can't see that, here's what he wrote. The 15th Congressional District deserves a member of Congress who's in touch with the people, can work well with others, and will honor our national motto. Like Swalwell, this liberal guy known as a progressive guy, is using atheism to go after Pete Stark because he was in a primary and he figured it was an easy way to do it. I would argue that's not the only reason Pete Stark lost the primary, but it's one of those things. It was hanging fruit for anyone who wanted to take it. I'll give you just one more example, though there are others. When you all know Kirsten Sinema, she's the senator from Arizona. When she was elected to Congress several years ago, I believe that was 2012, there were rumblings, certainly in atheist circles, that she was openly non-religious. And She was also openly bisexual. And both of those things got a lot of play when she was running for office and after she won her primary. But after she won the primary, when she's on the ballot, she starts running away from the atheist label. She'll talk about being openly bisexual. She will not say she's openly non-religious. And so at some point, I even emailed her campaign and I said, can you just settle this? What is her religious label? I don't want to put something on her. What does she use to describe herself? This is what her campaign sent me. She believes the term non-theist, atheist, or non-believer are not befitting of her life's work or personal character, as if those words would be a slur against her. And it turns out that was very prophetic, because it turns out she can't make up her mind on her label either. But I will say, after she got elected to the House, she took an oath on, I believe that was a copy of the Arizona Constitution, maybe. And when she got elected to the Senate in 2018, she took an oath on a stack of law books instead of the Bible, which is something, I guess. I mean, it could have been a Bible. She chose not to. And clearly that has worked out for everybody. But here's the interesting thing. She is technically the only member, for a long time, she was the only member of Congress who was openly unaffiliated. And this is the term. This is a survey that the Pew Research Center does every 2 years. They put out a list of everybody in Congress and their religious affiliation. And you could see on this screen, this is from 2014, shortly after Sinema was elected. But you can see lots of Protestants, lots of Catholics. Here's the Kyrsten Sinema number. One member of Congress is unaffiliated compared to 23% of the American public that is unaffiliated. Look at those numbers, though. We're a quarter of the population that doesn't belong to any organized religion. And yet, what's our representation in Congress? One person. And it's Sinema. But so the point I want to make here is that this idea that there is a taboo against being an open atheist who makes it into Congress or who gets elected to high office, that stigma has existed for a really long time. And I think that hurts all of us because we all have to cope with the stigma of being an atheist. You have to watch what you say around people because they're going to assume the worst. So I think also this is like a self-fulfilling prophecy, though, because it sounds like being an open atheist means you can't get elected. But at the same time, sometimes you got to write your own, you got to carve your own path here. I think Elizabeth Warren said it last year when they said, are you electable? And she basically said everyone's unelectable until they get elected. You know, we can't have a Black president until Barack Obama gets elected. And now it's a thing that happens. And you can't have a woman running for president until Hillary Clinton runs. And now it's kind of an expected thing. It's not that weird anymore. Hard, but not weird. And that's the thing. If you just had an atheist in office and they showed you it wasn't scary, I don't think it would be as hard anymore. So I'll show you one more slide, and then I'll get to the optimistic part of this talk. But this is a survey from 2012. This is when Kyrsten Sinema was elected. But in 2012, Gallup does a poll where they say, if you could vote for anybody for president in your preferred political party who happened to be a blank, would you be okay with that? And look at the list. Like, would you, if you're a Republican and you were voting for a Republican president and the person running on your ticket was Black, would you vote for that person? And 96% of people are like, yeah, of course I would. Why would I care? They belong to my party. That's not a deal breaker for me. So that's good. I mean, it should be 100, but there you go. But look at where atheist is on the list. Way at the bottom. Of all the things Gallup surveyed, the biggest deal breaker for people was atheist. If you were an open atheist, 54% of people were like, I don't care if that person's running for my party. I'm not voting for an atheist. Only 54% would. By the way, when this survey came out, it was actually celebrated by many atheists. Do you know why? Because it's above 50%. We finally crossed that threshold. Okay, that's the depressing half of my talk. Let me get to the more optimistic thing, because I will tell you, in the past decade, since this particular survey, things have gotten a lot better. I'll show you the same survey. This is the Gallup survey. This is the same picture as the 2012 one. It's just a different visual. You can see that for just about every group surveyed, the numbers got higher. People became more electable, and some of them have leveled off at the very top. Black people, women, Jewish. None of those things are obstacles as much as they used to be when it comes to electability. Even being gay or lesbian, harder, but it has gone up. But atheist is still right there in gray at the very bottom. It's not pleasant. We have a long way to go. Okay, so let me show you this. This is the Gallup survey from 2015. So we're talking about the primaries are going on. Eventually, Hillary and Trump will run against each other in 2016. But Bernie Sanders was now running in the primary. And Gallup asked again, would you vote for someone if they were an atheist? And once again, who would you vote for someone for president in your party if they were a blank? And there's atheist at the bottom of the, oh my God, it's not at the bottom anymore. We are up here. We're at 58% are cool with us. Bernie dragged socialist to the very bottom of the list because now they added that label in, and they have to ask, are you okay with the socialist running for your party's ticket? And all of a sudden we have a new unpopular thing. But look at atheists is now at 58%, which is much higher than ever before. So that's something. Now, here's a rhetorical question, but a question I would just pose for you. We have actually, I'll show you slides in a second. We've actually improved on that 58% too. Why has that happened? Why have we improved between like 2012 and let's say today? It's actually gotten much better. More people are likely to be fine with an atheist running for office on their party's ticket. But what has changed in that time? And this is, think about what's happened in the past decade or so. You have really, I would consider, a merging between the Republican Party and like white evangelical Christians. That's part of it. I think it's easier than ever to find people who are comfortable with being an atheist when it comes to books, blogs, podcasts, characters on television shows. You just see more atheists or people who are comfortable with not believing in God. You see an expanding internet where it's not hard to find a tribe of other atheists. You have plenty of church scandals. And of course, I mean, you have 4 years of Donald Trump where you saw what happened when conservative Christians got access to power and what they did with it. And I think that just makes a lot of people, and this is not a partisan thing, it makes a lot of people who are not comfortable with those politics not want to associate with the religion that's commonly associated with it. So all this stuff is leading people away from organized religion, away from this belief that if you're a politician who's not religious, you're the problem. Like, we've seen what happens when you're a politician who very much believes in God and you wear that on your sleeve and you talk about it all the time. So for a lot of reasons, I think we are seeing this number grow in terms of people comfortable with an atheist. And here's an amazing thing that happened over the past few years. We had a member of Congress, a sitting member of Congress, come out and say, you know what, I don't believe in God. And I don't use the word atheist, I use the word humanist, but I don't believe. It's Jared Huffman, another Democrat from California, coincidentally, but he has come out and said, I don't believe in God. I am a humanist. He uses a lowercase h, so it's not so much of a label, but an ideology here. But he was very open about saying it. And by the way, he's been reelected, I think, twice since coming out that way. And here's what I love about Jared Huffman. After he came out and he saw, oh, it's not that scary, he didn't get a lot of hate mail or anything like that, he actually started the Congressional Free Thought Caucus, kind of in response to the Congressional Prayer Caucus, which is big and has money and a lot of members. He said, you know what, I'll start small, but I'll go ahead and start it. This is the Congressional Free Thought Caucus, 14 members as of now. Some of them may be, they're from all over the place. But if you notice one thing on this list, you see Pramila Jayapal, you see Rashida Tlaib down there, you see Jamie Raskin up there. There are people on this list who are openly, they would say, I'm Jewish, I'm Muslim. I think Hank Johnson in the middle there is Buddhist, I think. But only one person on this entire screen right now is openly non-religious, and it's Jared Huffman, who's the humanist. Everyone else says, I am religious in some way, or at least I use a religious label. Or in the case of Raskin, he says, I'm not really religious, but I'm culturally Jewish and I'm tied to that description. But they all support the goals of the Congressional Free Thought Caucus, which involves fighting for church-state separation and fighting against blasphemy laws and discrimination against atheists, however it may pop up. I mean, these are things you would hope every member of Congress gets on board with. But I really love the fact that none of these people are afraid of the words, the free thought label, humanist, whatever. Judy, was that a question over there? That's okay if it's not. I'll keep going here. As of this writing, but as of this talk, by the way, Huffman is still the only open atheist, open humanist.
Why do humans insist on labeling themselves?
Why do humanists? Did you say?
Why do human beings, right, insist on labeling?
Sure.
Jacob,
So that's a good question.
Sorry,
We'll save
Hemant.
that for the end. I think
Yeah.
for my sake, the reason I'm really vested in this is because, look, the Christians, the Catholics who are in Congress, especially ones who are Republican, they very much make it a part of their identity. And when they campaign, they very much say, I think Mike Pence said this all the time, I am a Christian first, I am a conservative second, and I'm a Republican third, or something like that. They have no problem using their religious label as code for you can trust me, you can vote for me, whatever. And so, I mean, look, there's a good philosophical question about should we really have these labels at all? But for the sake of the fact that a lot of conservatives in Congress do have a label and they're not afraid of using it, it's interesting to know what do more progressive members of Congress do. And again, all these people have some religious label to them. They all identify as something. Very few of them say, I'm not going to answer that question. But at least some of these, only one of them has the courage, I think, to say I'm openly non-religious. And I find that interesting. Let me show you one other thing. Gallup, again, in 2016, the primary I said with Hillary and Trump and Bernie Sanders, that's the fourth column here, the 2015 one. Gallup ran the same poll again when Biden and Trump were running in 2020 at the beginning of the year. Check out where atheist is on this list. There we are. We're at the very bottom there, 60%. 60% of people say, I'm comfortable voting for an atheist in my party for president. But look at one other thing. Look at how much that's gone up since 1958 when Gallup first asked the question. When they first asked it, only 18% of people said they were okay with it. It's jumped up to 60. And that is with no real person on the ballot changing the vibe there. Look at what happened between 58 and 83 for Catholics. And we're talking, like, if you look at the second line there, that's before John F. Kennedy ran for president and after John F. Kennedy was president. You went from 67% of people saying, well, all right, I'll vote for a Catholic, to 92%. And I would argue Biden's Catholicism, it didn't hurt him in any way. People are pretty comfortable with that. Atheists, it's still going up. But I'll show you one other thing. Even though 60% seems really low for atheists, if you break this survey up by age group and you ask people like under the age of 35, would you be comfortable voting for an atheist? It jumps up significantly. So that is changing. Here's something else that's changing. Starting in 2018, with the help of the Center for Free Thought Equality, which is like the political arm of the American Humanist Association, we began keeping track. I should say, I'm taking credit. I shouldn't take credit. The Center for Free Thought Equality began keeping track of every openly non-religious person running for state office or higher. There's not a lot running for Congress, but there's a lot of openly non-religious people who run for statewide office. And this is just a screenshot from 2019. But if you look here, this is just state legislatures. Look at the non-religious labels. Some people say I'm spiritual, but not religious. Some said I'm atheist. Some said I'm unaffiliated. I'm not religious. I'm agnostic. They all have different labels, but they're not openly religious. And all of these people, they were not just on the ballot. They won their primaries and they were running for office. And so look at what happens. The green, if you could see the green here, I forgot if this is a video here, but if you look at the greens are the one who won their race. And as I'm scrolling down here, I know there's a lot of purple. I know there's a lot of people who lose, but guess what? A lot of people lose elections, especially when they're challengers. Look at how many greens there are, which is to say, these are people who are openly non-religious. They're not afraid to use a label, and they are on the ballot, and they were elected. It's incredible how many there are. I know I'm just scrolling through here, and you all want to see the specifics. I will leave a link in a little bit with the 2020 results where I did the same thing here. But I want to show you one thing before I come back to that. This is from the Center for Free Thought Equality. They also do endorsements to candidates. And in 2014, they offered 18 endorsements to openly non-religious people running for office. And then let's see how many of them win the race. And they offered 18 endorsements. 7 of those people got elected. Guess what happened in 2016? Obviously a high turnout election. They made 61 endorsements, 44 of them won. 2018, 291 endorsements, 68 people won. What do you think happened in 2020 last year? Turns out they actually made fewer endorsements. Why? Because they could be more selective. But look at how many people won. 191 endorsements, but more winners than before. That's incredible. There are 72 people who ran for an office who got elected to that position. And again, these are people who are willing to publicly accept an endorsement from a non-religious group. You would think an opponent of theirs would be like, I'm going to jump on that. I'm going to use that against them. But these people willingly took the endorsement, advertised the endorsement, didn't hurt them in their races. That's cool. I'm going to go back to this for a second, just in case you're curious about 2020. Here's what I can tell you. All 14 members of the Congressional Free Thought Caucus, they all ran for re-election. They all got re-elected without a problem. So their affiliation with the Free Thought Caucus did not hurt them. Also, there are now 10 non-religious state senators, and there are 45 openly non-religious state representatives. So 55 statewide officials who are openly non-religious. By the way, in a lot of states, not just condensed into one. I won't read through all their names right now, but that's the idea here. So a couple, by the way, I should say, keeping track of that list, I had one of those legislators contact me and say she used that list of all the people running for office and who won their races. She used that list in the state of New Hampshire to find co-sponsors for one of her bills. Because she's like, which of my colleagues would get on board with this? Oh, let me see who the other atheists are. And she found them that way. I also got an email from another legislator who said, how come I'm not on your list? I'm openly atheist. And I'm like, I was using information from another source, but it's nice to meet you. So it's nice to have them on the list. Like that stuff helps. They're not afraid of coming out. So a couple takeaways from here, and then I'll open it up to questions. One is like, what can we learn from all this? Here's what I can show you from the last several years. One is the key to getting elected as an atheist, if you are an open atheist and running for office of any kind, I should say, is, excuse me, don't let your atheism define you. And let me give you an example of what that looks like in practice. This is Megan Hunt. And a couple years ago, she ran for a state Senate seat in Nebraska. And this is what you would see if you clicked on her campaign website. Seems fine. I remember she came to my awareness because I saw a Nebraska newspaper that did a little profile between her and her opponent. These are nonpartisan races, ostensibly, but they did a profile. And this is what I saw in the profile. It had a little sidebar and it said, "What's your faith?" And she had written atheist. And I'm like, oh no, she's going to lose. She's in Nebraska and she openly said that. And she must have no idea that you're not supposed to say that thing when running for office. But she won the race. She is a state senator. And what she told me later is she wasn't afraid of saying that because one, it's authentic. That's who she is. She's not a religious person. But two, she made sure she never made it a central part of her campaign because it's the least important thing about her for voters to know. If they say, what are you campaigning for? What's your platform? It's on things like roads. It's on making sure people have a living wage. It's progressive policies. And her religion just doesn't come into play. And she always made sure people knew that. I'm not religious, but I'm not here fighting for you. I'm not fighting to advocate that other people should be too. That's up to you. Let me tell you what I'm actually campaigning for. Standard, campaigning 101, but she never let atheism define her. And in the years she has been in office, honestly, I've never really seen it used against her. She is known as a progressive politician, for better or for worse, depending on where you live. But she's not known as like the atheist politician, So she made it very clear, don't let your atheism define you. And then your opponents can't do it either. They can't use it against you because you're not running away from it, which is interesting. Here's number 2. Basically, don't run away from the word, to echo that point, which is, look, if atheism, and I don't care if you're running for city council or school board or any local office either, you don't have to run away from that identity. Look, if it's the only thing anyone knows about you, it could be political poison. But if it's just a thing about you and you're not making a big deal about it, other people are not going to be able to make a big deal about it. I think Pete Buttigieg said this last year. If you hold progressive values, you're always going to be attacked for being a person with progressive values. So let's not play the game. Like, it doesn't matter if you say, yeah, I'm an atheist, but I'm moderate, but I'm Republican, whatever. If they don't like you, they'll find a reason to go after you. The easiest thing for you to do at that point is embrace who you are, be authentic about it, let voters know you're not trying to like pull a fast one on them. And then it's really hard to use that against you. Here's another one. And this is where maybe you've noticed this by now. We are non-existent in today's Republican Party. I mentioned there are 55 statewide elected non-religious people. Every single one of them is a Democrat. Every member of the Free Thought Caucus is a Democrat. Does that have to be the case? I mean, if you ask me philosophically or something, I would say there's a way to have conservative beliefs while still being non-religious. You could make a case for that. But in reality, more or less, the Republican Party today is very much a conservative Christian party. And an open atheist is probably going to have a really hard time getting elected as a Republican. There was 1 or 2 like Republicans I have met in the past several years who are openly non-religious. One of them had to switch party labels after he came public with that. He became an independent and then he didn't get elected for re-election. And another one who said, I am an atheist and I'm a Republican and I'm on city council. He then got caught up in some like bribery scandal in Ohio and he's not in politics anymore. So I don't know what that says about anything, but I don't know. This is a discussion maybe worth having, which is, yeah, we don't exist in the Republican Party. There are a couple of very small groups trying to change that. I don't know if that's necessarily a good or bad thing, but just putting it out there, there are no open atheists in elected office, at least at the statewide level or higher, that I can think of. There's none at the moment. Here's another thing I want to make sure you are aware of. We, as a group of non-religious people, we do not vote like we should. And here's what I mean by that. This is from the Public Religion Research Institute. If you look at the left side of this graph, the year 2000, at the time, we were about 14% of the population non-religious, but we were only 9% of the people who voted that year. You're in Florida. You understand how important that is in 2000. But look at what happens along the way, too. Even as our numbers begin to grow, and we are now like 25 to 30% of the American population, look at how the voting percentage has more or less stayed the same. 12%. It is really hard to get numbers for 2020 because it was the pandemic. And when you're doing mail-in voting, people can't really get a good handle on what your religious background is. But even if you jump it up to like 20%, which is very optimistic, it's still much lower. We are punching below our weight when it comes to voting. So for all the celebration about how America is becoming less and less religious, it doesn't matter if we don't vote like it matters. Because I will tell you this, evangelical Christians, especially white evangelical Christians, even as their numbers go down, they vote like it matters. And you could see in our politics, it shows. They have something to show for it. And this is something we all ought to be concerned about, because what if we talk about why we are atheists or humanists, I would argue politics is a pretty good way to show an extension of our values. But if it doesn't matter, because a lot of us don't vote like it matters, we are not helping our own cause. And I'm not even saying you got to vote for a certain party or another. This is just voting across the board. We don't pay enough attention to it. And I would leave you with this last thing. All of you here, if you can, run for something. You don't have to run for state house, state senate, city council races matter. School board races matter. And most people don't pay attention to those. I mean, these are not the ones necessarily covered by cable news. They're not even covered by newspapers, like the two of them that are left in the country. But those things matter. And I'll tell you what, the religious right cares about that stuff. They will get candidates on those ballots. They will volunteer and work hard to get those candidates elected. And I would guess a lot of you know what happens when those candidates get elected to school board, to city council. The ones, the races that affect you personally the most tend to be the ones that get the least attention. But I would argue, I hope if anything you've taken away from this, it's that even if you are a member of this group, even if you are open about being an atheist, the city council, school board races, you don't really pay any attention to someone's religious background. It doesn't matter. You are fighting for something else. And you could talk about those issues. What you need are people who are passionate about those things, willing to get people out and voting for a race they probably won't pay much attention to. But I will tell you this, conservative Christians, they run for these offices. They win a lot of those seats. And I would argue that's not good for any of us. That's not a partisan thing. That's on values and how our education system functions, things like that. There is a website, by the way, called Run For Something that can actually help you. If you've never done it before and you know nothing about it, but you're curious, I have no ties to them. I think it's a cool website. So if you happen to be a progressive and you want to run for something, that's an awesome site to check out. They'll get you started. I think that's it for me. That's my contact information if you want to reach out to me later. But otherwise, I'm going to give it back to Judy, and you can tell me how you want to do questions and anything like that. But thanks for sitting through this, and I hope we could do this in person again. Thanks.
Okay. Where am I?
I'm going to stop the screen share for a second here.
Thank you.
There we go.
Okay, please remember to raise your electronic hand, which is under the reactions on the bottom of your screen. We will be limiting questions and comments to a couple of minutes. So please make sure you've got your questions and comments down pat, because we're not going to want to make sure everybody gets a chance to talk that wants to talk. I will recognize you as we go and ask you to unmute yourself and ask your question. And so, David, you're first.
Oh, thank you. Say thank you, Hemant, for doing this for us and taking the time to do this. Say, Judy, I'm having a senior moment. Who is the gentleman in South Carolina that ran for office here? He wrote a book called Candidate
That was
Without a...
Herb Silverman is the guy
Herb
you're
Silverman.
thinking of.
Yeah, right. We could use more. We could use more people like Herb Silverman. But my question is, Hemant, who would you nominate, or what, or maybe just what type of person would you nominate to who's already in the public sphere that you think would improve the image of atheists and the general public?
It's a tough question. I don't have a pat response for you. What I would say is, in general, I think what would help us is if someone who was already generally respected by the public happened to come out and say they're not religious. That would go a long way. That would do us a lot of favors right there. If if someone who already had a good reputation just admitted they weren't religious. I don't know who it would be. It could be anybody. I'm sorry, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. There's not necessarily one person, but just pick anyone with a good reputation who doesn't normally talk about religion. If like Oprah came out and said, I'm not religious, you know what I mean? Like, or anybody who's just known for being likable, a good person. Sometimes when you have actors come out, it's always really interesting because people like their characters. And then it's like, oh, I like that character. I like the person. It actually makes it a lot easier, more palatable for them to come out as non-religious, as opposed to finding someone who's an atheist now that I would love to elevate, because it hasn't necessarily worked. Because if you're in the public spotlight for being an atheist, it's because you're already doing something that a lot of people find offensive. You know what I mean?
Wouldn't it be great if a well-known evangelical would come out and say, hey, atheists aren't terrible people. You know, they think differently than we do, but they're not immoral. They don't, you know, they're not horrible people. They're not criminals. And
it wouldn't even be hard for them to do that. And they wouldn't be giving up any position they hold. And yet it's very hard to find those public figures.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Jim Young.
Okay, my concern is with the number one item on your list, which you said, don't allow atheism to define you. Now we know that the religious community has defined us. And my question then is, unless I'm staying in the closet, and if I do stay in the closet, I'm letting them define me. But if I come out of the closet and say, okay, I'm a non-believer, how am I preventing the religious community from defining who I am?
Sure. No, that's a fantastic point. Let me try to make clear what I was hoping to go for there, which is to say, if someone asks you, what's your religious belief? I don't want you to shy away from that. I don't want you to say anything other. You could say, I'm an atheist. But also, if you're a good politician, you also know like the real answer to that question is, well, I don't believe in God. I am an atheist. But I think what's important is that I want to run for office because I want to represent everybody, you know, religious, non-religious. I'm fighting for your religious freedom. And that's what I mean by not letting atheism define you. I'm not going to bring it up if I'm running for office because it doesn't matter. I will answer your question honestly if some reporter wants to know, but I don't want to make it the central reason for why I'm running necessarily. I'm not going to advertise it in a campaign ad, but I'm not going to shy away from it when asked. I mean, again, if you don't make it a big deal, at least with the politicians, like the statewide people who were running for office, the 50, 55 people who ended up winning their races, all of them, it was publicly known that they were non-religious when they were on the ballots, but they just didn't focus on it. And I will tell you, in 2020, and I say this as someone who is looking for negative campaign ads against those people, it did not come up. Maybe once for one person, and even then it didn't do much. It just never came up because those people were just open about who they were. But when you saw their websites, their campaign websites, when you saw what they were saying, they were talking about how to help everyone in their districts, not how to, you know, use their platform to advance atheism. And that's kind of what I'm going for. You can't stop the religious right from defining you, but you don't have to make it a big deal on your own.
Jim, did that answer your question?
I think that was a great answer to the question. And what I got at from his response was, don't make atheist activism a part of your campaign.
Because why? Yeah, that's it. And because if you're running for any of those seats, city council, school board, a state rep, you're not running to be an atheist activist, even if that is something you do right now. You are running for a different position. So you don't have to say, I'm running because I'm going to use that spot to do this. You're saying the truth, which is I want to be a state rep because I want to improve people's lives. I don't care if you're religious or not. I'll save the activism for the activists. I just happen to be an atheist. You know what I mean? I'm not saying that's always going to work. If we had more time, I could give you an example of that backfiring sometimes. But by and large, if you just don't make it the focus of who you are. I would say, like, because it's famous, Pete Buttigieg ran openly gay. That was something a lot of people talked about. But if you watch his interviews, he understood, yes, I am a gay man who's running for office, but that's not the reason I'm running for office. That's not what I'm trying to do, whatever that means, if I get elected. And I think that's part of why it didn't really hurt him. He lost for other reasons in the primary, but that is the thing that hasn't like been a sore sticking point for everybody, because he didn't run to be an activist. He ran to be a politician and do whatever you do in those spots.
I think your response is probably the best response that anyone could give to that question.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bill Norsworthy.
Thank you. And Hemant, great to see you again. And I have two questions, if I could. Number one is, when are you going to be running? And I'm sure that Chicago needs you to be there to represent them at some level in some position. And I can't think of anybody who would do a better job of that. So I hope you do run sometime in the future, because I know you would represent yourself and all of our interests very well. But anyway, that was kind of an aside.
I appreciate that.
But my question is about the graph that you showed about the growth in the number of non-religious people up to about 25%.
Yeah.
But that the number of voters, the percentage of voters who are non-religious is stuck at about 12%. And I'm curious to know, what are the demographics of that that are causing that? I'm guessing that it's because they're younger voters that are expressing the non-religious position and they haven't gotten into the voting pattern yet. Is that?
So yeah, if you're looking at the percent of the adult population, why is that number going up? That is not an easy answer. There's so many factors that come into play. But there we go.
Muted there.
There we
Sorry,
go.
I accidentally did that. Sorry.
No, it's okay. Whatever survey you are looking at, it shows that the percentage of non-religious Americans is on the rise. There are a million reasons for that. But yes, part of it is younger people are just less religious overall. That is a big deal. And also, I would argue that we've seen what happens over, whether it's the George W. Bush administration or the Trump administration. And by the way, this is true even of Democratic presidents. There's always a backlash to power. And so if you see someone like Trump, where conservative Christianity and his administration were like tied together, there's going to be a backlash if you're not a fan of his politics too. So I'm not surprised by the growth of the adult population. It's probably closer to 40% who are non-religious, even if they are not atheists, agnostics, or anything like that. The voting numbers, however, and this is kind of the key. If you are devout enough to have a label, like you are an evangelical Christian, you are a Catholic, if you're someone who takes religion seriously enough that you give yourself a label, politics is a clear extension of that, because it's all about your values. Obviously, a lot of campaigns touch on cultural issues that speak to your religious beliefs as well. So if you take your religion seriously, and a lot of people do, you're going to vote seriously, and you're going to make it a habit in terms of what you do. We, as a community of non-religious people, I mean, keep in mind, of the 40% of non-religious people, I would say only like, I don't know, 5 to 6% are openly atheist and use that label. Maybe another 6% are agnostics. The vast majority of the non-religious Americans are people who just don't have any organized religious affiliation. They might believe in something, but whatever. And when you realize that's the vast majority of what we're talking about, it's really hard to get them to care about the things we, as atheists who are not afraid of the word, care about. So you have a very apathetic group of people in our camp. You don't have a very apathetic group of people in the conservative camp. So even if there were, let's say, cultural war issues on the ballot in some election, it's really hard to get us as atheists getting people to the polls. I mean, there's a built-in infrastructure to get religious people to the polls, whether you're conservative religious or like a Black progressive church. There's an infrastructure to help them get to the polls. We don't have that. We don't have the numbers to do it. We don't have the infrastructure to do it. So our voting is less and less. And again, younger people, by and large, don't vote in big numbers. Non-religious people don't vote in big numbers. And you're seeing the result of that in the yellow on this graph. So that's working against us in a lot of ways. And by the way, to answer your question about running for office, it's not out of the question to run for like a city council or a school board type of position, but I would keep two things in mind. One is I've spent more than a decade sharing my opinions online. I have so much opposition research I have written on myself, which can't possibly be good. And also, I really do pay attention more and write more and talk more about national level politics. And I'm lucky that where I live, there really is no shortage of awesome qualified candidates who care about local issues in a way that I genuinely do not pay attention to because I'm more focused on the broader stuff. And I'm very happy to vote for the people who are running for those seats. So I appreciate the gesture, but like, it's not out of the question to run for like a school board or city council position, especially if I ever felt the urge to really get invested in that sort of thing. It would be really, yeah, it's an awesome thing to do. And I would encourage others to do it as well. I'm going to get out of the screen share for the next question.
Thank you, Bill. Did that answer your question?
It did indeed. Very well. Thank you.
I'm going to skip over Jim for the moment and go to Andrea. Andrea, could you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Hello, thank you for your presentation. It brings forth a lot of questions to my mind. I was born into a Jewish family, and I'm going to see them on Halloween, and I'm going to go Halloweening with my great niece. Excuse me. She's 10 years old, and I'm going to be dressed as an atheist, which includes a hat that says atheist and my shirt that says Atheist of Florida. It's very possible she's going to ask me what is an atheist, and her mother and father are going to be around, and what should I answer her?
That one may be above my pay grade, but I would say I'm looking at this call right now. I see Richard Wade is on the call. My buddy Richard Wade. You should talk to Richard before you are done with this, because that guy has these answers. It is really tough when it comes to like family dynamics and stuff like that. Whatever I have to suggest to you is it depends so much on the family dynamics there. So I'm gonna cowardly pass on that question because I don't know the situation that well.
So Richard, would you like to jump in and offer some
Please
advice?
jump in, Richard.
Please, 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 please.
Thanks a lot. As Hemant said, well, the way I would handle that as a question, like, you know, from one of my old advice column letters, is there's a lot there in the situation where it all depends. It depends on your relationship with your great aunt, your relationship with her parents, their religious views, their attitude toward you, a heck of a lot. Your great aunt's, she's 10 years old. So that's where there's a lot of variety and a lot of range in how well she understands such things. And so all I can say is it depends. I would say think it out really carefully. Be prepared for a good explanation, either one that you take the initiative to say to her, or one that you wait for her to ask. She's probably going to ask that, even if you're by the third doorbell ringing, somebody is going to say something about your costume. And if you haven't said anything to your niece, she's going to go, and you're going to have to answer right there in front of everybody. So I would say take care of it ahead of time. But I think it's great that you want to normalize. In a way, it's sort of ironic. You normalize something as a Halloween costume where everybody else is dressed as zombies and Draculas, and That's great.
Well, an atheist is scary too.
Yeah, it's
By the
terrible.
way, this is in the state of Georgia.
Oh my God. You're very brave. Maybe wear some Kevlar underneath your.
Maybe so. I also thought of wearing a white sheet and a white pointy hat. I thought that would be more appropriate for Georgia, but I decided.
Good luck with that one.
Yeah, not a good idea, Andrea.
They might get
That I won't do.
you might get a reaction like you didn't wear a costume.
No.
That's good. I was thinking of saying to her, listen, that's something I want to talk to you about, and I'm sure you'll have a lot of questions. So let's save that for another time.
Yeah.
Good idea.
Thanks, Richard.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks, Andrea. Jim
Okay.
Peterson, please unmute yourself and ask your question or make your comments.
All right. Well, it's been a very enjoyable session, I have to say. As both a socialist and an atheist, I'm doomed. Now, I say that advisedly because here in the Tampa Bay area, we have two free thinkers who are in public boards. One of them works for the fire department board that allocates funds for the fire department. The other one is on the conservation board, and he's both a socialist and an atheist. So, and he's pretty open about it too. He does a lot of correspondence, so I'm quite pleased to see that. And I wanted to also congratulate you on demonstrating that independence of mind and knowledge of issues is what politics is all about. Remember, the idea is to serve others, not to be there to advocate for your personal beliefs, no matter what they are. And I think you made that point extremely well. My last point is a question. What is that weird microphone you're using?
A blue snowball. That's what it's called. Yeah, it's bulky and visible, but on my computer for Zoom, it's probably the easiest thing to use.
Okay. You don't have to hold it. I think I can hear you fine.
I could lay it down here and I never know, so we'll see.
I like it.
You're doing good. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jim. Next is post-theological. If you would unmute yourself and please ask your question.
Hi, this is Megs. I replaced my name with the term post-theological.
Okay.
So that if you're in a group and you wish to express your feelings about this, but I often say, in fact, I'll say double, I'm an atheist. Actually, I'm post-theological. I don't even worry about that stuff anymore. I'm more concerned about X. And it's really funny, growing up in the 50s, very Catholic, I was Pavlovian, trained like a Pavlovian dog to bark and growl at the word atheist. I mean, and I'm one of those people, you say atheism, I think Marilyn O'Hare. But post-theological has not much or any baggage associated with it. Mostly it makes people scratch their head. And I just say I'm post-theological, so I kind of don't worry about that stuff anymore. Mostly I'm concerned with X and just move the conversation along.
Right.
And it's, people often laugh at the term, but they're not as automatically chained against it. Also, I want to add one thing, especially for this group, which is such a well-informed group. About 5, 8, 10 years ago, every election cycle, I write my own crib sheet, very short, so you can print it on one page. And I send it to my closest 200 friends, because of course, everybody knows who they're going to vote for president, senator, US House, governor, you know, for the top 5, 10 offices. But as people were saying, by the time you get down to judges and school boards, most people don't have the time, the memory, etc. But I don't just write the crib sheet myself. I call my 5 or 10 brightest political friends to help me build my crib sheet, and I fill out the whole ballot. And every election, I'll send out 200 copies and I'll get back 20 thank yous. So crib sheet away, babies.
I just shared this. Thank you for that. In the comments, I mentioned the 2020. I was keeping track of people who are running for office who are openly non-religious. If you're curious to see that data, it's in that link. And to Meg, what you were saying about the post-theological thing, I think even if people don't use that label, they certainly feel that way for a lot of those nuns who have no particular label. That's essentially what they're paying attention to as well. It's the actions, not necessarily a specific label.
Yes.
Thank you, Megs. Sarah? You're muted, Sarah.
There we
Hi,
go.
everyone. Thanks, Judy. Hey, this is just a quick question I have, but I was wondering, there's a number of high-profile actors and actresses in Hollywood that are atheists. Brad Pitt identifies as atheist. Ricky Gervais identifies as atheist. I mean, Daniel Radcliffe identifies as atheist. And you mentioned during this conversation, you know, if we had somebody who was high profile, who could potentially push atheism in America, that would be beneficial to the cause. What can the cause do to be able to help, you know, maybe see actors or actresses to get them to want to do something like that, to spread the message, to help it along, because they're out there and they exist.
Yeah.
So what can we do?
It's a great question. You bring up some of the big names I would definitely point to. So there's a couple things going on there. One is Daniel Radcliffe is super well spoken. I know only what I've seen of him from a distance and stuff, but he's always really thoughtful when he gives interviews and things. But realize if you're doing an interview with Daniel Radcliffe, it's probably because of a film project or whatever show he's in right now. So the topic may not come up very often. And it's really hard to get the interviewers to ask those types of questions when it's totally unrelated, and to get him to open up and potentially, you know, lose some, what's the word I'm looking for here? Lose an audience, alienate them somehow by talking about something that might be controversial. So that's part of it. It's really hard to get them to open up about something when it's not the reason they are doing an interview in the first place. Now, how do you pump them up? How do you prop them up in some way? This is also hard because we don't have a lot of stages as atheists to say, hey, we want you to come to our thing and talk about religion. The closest thing I can think of is like some national convention for an atheist group. Like American Atheists a couple of years ago had Hugh Laurie, the guy who's Dr. House on House, and he talked about religion there. Is that a really big stage? I don't know. I don't know how many people outside American atheist circles would have talked about it, though there were a lot of articles in the press about that event. The closest bigger thing I can think of is something like the Reason Rally that happened in like 2016 and 4 years prior to that. But again, the whole issue with the Reason Rally is even if you were trying to bring together atheists in one spot for some big event, how much attention is it going to get? How many people are we talking? Even the biggest rally for atheists in the country, probably the 2012 Reason Rally, estimated 20,000 people at best. There are mega churches that would go out of business if that was their weekend attendance numbers. So even if you had like a high profile celebrity appear at an event like that, it's one of those like once in a decade sort of things. It still doesn't attract a lot of people. So to get to your point, it's really hard to do it ourselves. It's really hard to organically try to elevate these people who would be awesome ambassadors for atheism, if you will. What we can hope for is that, you know, when they get a chance to talk about these issues, that they take that opportunity. Brad Pitt, I haven't seen him do a lot of interviews where he gets super in depth about his personal beliefs, maybe in a long magazine profile or something like that. And you hope a reporter is aware and might bring that up or get them to ask about it. Other times when the people we're talking about have the option to do it, people like Ricky Gervais, Bill Maher, again, it's very much they use their atheism as a cudgel to poke fun at religion, which may or may not make you laugh, but I would argue they're doing it for the sake of being funny about it. They're not trying to be ambassadors. They're not trying to win you over. They're trying to make the other side look stupid. which strategically, I don't know how good that is. But again, so it's really hard to organically elevate it. My ideal situation, you know, given everything I'm talking about, would be someone like, I don't know, like Ellen or like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, someone who is known, even if they're polarizing in some ways, they already have a platform. You know them for the work they do. If they happen to say they're not religious, casually even, I think that would go a long way. Now, none of those two are not. They are religious, but like it would be really cool if you had someone who was already in that position who just took the opportunity to say so, and they weren't afraid of saying it, and they just brushed it off like it was no big deal. It's just who they are. I'm sure there are a lot of younger celebrities like musicians, singers, actors who I am totally not familiar with, who probably are not religious. But again, how often do they get the chance to talk about anything that's not the project they are involved with? So it's a really hard thing to be able to do. You can tell that even in politics, the politicians who are supposed to be advocating for their platforms, they take every opportunity to remind people how Christian they are. We just don't have that base to start off with. It's really hard.
Thank you for your answer.
Thank you,
Sure.
Sarah. Mr. Norsworthy is back. Unmute yourself, please, Bill.
One person you haven't mentioned who gets on TV fairly frequently is Ron Reagan. And his ads for the Freedom from Religion Foundation, which is at least, I think from our point of view, one of the greatest commercials ever.
Yeah, you know what? I don't have the answer to this. I feel like the Freedom from Religion Foundation has some donor who is like, listen, if you'll play that ad on cable news or Colbert Report at or the Late Show or something, I'll cover the cost for you to play that. And so, yeah, the Freedom from Religion Foundation has run a 30-second ad in which Ronald Reagan says he is non-religious. He's not afraid of going to hell. He's a proud atheist, support FFRF. It's a great advocacy commercial. Again, I would go back to, as much as I love seeing that commercial and I appreciate that he's talking about it and it's going on air nationally. I question how many people are familiar with him. Yeah, obviously his father, they know. Obviously, he has been a progressive voice for that group. I don't know how familiar people would be with him. And I don't know if that's necessarily the same thing that Sarah was talking about in terms of getting a celebrity to talk about it. But you're right. Like, that's one of those things where, do you remember a few years ago when atheist groups were putting up billboards? Because we realized you can get a lot of publicity for a simple billboard ad that costs less than $1,000. But again, the point is, how much marketing can you get from it? And it was a ton. It was an opportunity to just like put up very clever, welcoming messages, or in your face, we're atheists, you're not messages. But you saw a wide variety of creativity in those. So again, it's a matter of embracing the opportunity and seeing what people will do with that. And again, the FFRF ad, it's very much in your face about it, which for the crowd they're playing to, it's interesting. I have to imagine either FFRF has someone paying for it all the time, or they are making in donations to make it worth the cost of playing those ads. So it's clearly working for somebody.
But he's really not known for doing any good works.
Right. He's known for being the son of Ronald Reagan.
Exactly.
And he's obviously been outspoken about progressive issues. Yeah. I forgot if he had a radio show, but he's definitely been on like MSNBC a lot and things like that. But you're right. He's not known for being like a beloved celebrity or being like a noted volunteer humanitarian. He's more famous in that ad, especially for being son of the former president.
Yeah. Thank you, Bill. Megs, you'll be the last question. So unless somebody has a really urgent question they want to ask and gets their hand up very quickly, Megs gets the last question.
I liked your slides. They were easy to read.
Oh, good.
So, but one of them was from Gallup. So I always kind of squint at a Gallup poll. Now you spend a lot of time on this for political and other questions. Whose polling do you think is superior? Any opinion on national pollsters?
Yeah.
And on Gallup.
Yeah, Gallup's been fine for the questions they ask. I mean, the key thing to keep in mind, Pew Research Center has done excellent work. There's one, PRRI, Public Religion Research Institute, that puts out really good work. Both of those, when it comes to religion and politics especially, they've been fantastic. And they are very open and transparent about, this is what we asked. This is all of our raw data for you to see. They've been really good about that. Gallup is not as transparent, but again, for the slides I showed you in the show, in this presentation, they tell you what they're asking and they tell you like the margin of error and things like that. So Gallup doesn't get into the weeds as much. Like the question about, would you vote for your preferred candidate for president in your party if that person were a blank? That's about as in-depth into religion as they really go. Pew Research goes into depth and they put out like 60, 70 page long reports on a lot of this stuff. I appreciate the work those ones do in particular, but I think the thing I really appreciate is they're just super open about, this is what we asked, this is when we did it, this is how we did it. Here are the shortcomings of this polling. And they ask the sort of thing that I think the people in this sort of presentation, all of us on this call, we would appreciate finding out about. There are other pollsters who do fine work. But again, when it comes to surveys, those are really the top of the line ones that I've relied on. And when they send me materials, I can safely assume that they're going to be backed up and like no one's going to question their methodology. I have gotten some survey results from some groups that are like, we did the survey about atheists, this is what we got. And it's like, you're making it very hard for me to see, how did you call people? How did you get this information? What did you ask specifically? I've seen that from Christian groups too. Like, this is what we could say about like post-Christian America. But it's really hard to find out how they did their work. So Pew is really good. PRRI is really good. Gallup is fine for what they do. They just don't do all the stuff I necessarily care about.
Great, thanks. Interesting. Yes.
Well, thank you, Hemant, so much. I'm so glad we finally got this worked out.
Yeah, thank you all. And by the way, again, I'll put my slide up here. If you have any questions, please feel free to message me or anything. And I genuinely appreciate all of you taking your time on a Sunday to do this. And thank you again to Judy for inviting me and making this happen.
I did want to ask you, are you going, I think I saw your name on Free Flow. Are you coming to Free Flow next year?
No,
No.
As far as I'm concerned, as far as I know, I'm not attending
Okay.
Free Flow this year. Please go if you can. It's fantastic. But I don't think I'm attending this
Okay.
year in the near
We'll
future.
miss you, that's for sure.
Me too. Man, I'll go anywhere right now.
Yeah, bro, won't we all?
Yeah.
I do have a concern about the running of, because crap, can't remember the name of the reactionary group that's going to run everybody for school board.
Yeah.
I am really concerned about school boards getting taken over by the right wing, and that's a really serious issue for us. And I'm wondering how we can encourage people to run for school board.
It's not easy. What it takes is someone who is known in the community. I mean, historically anyway, there's always exceptions here. Someone who's known in the community, who cares about the issue, and then a small handful of volunteers who are willing to help that person spread the message. I mean, it's so underrated, especially in any local election, the importance of knocking on doors, putting out information about you so people can find out who you are. I have seen from people who just say I'm running for office, they'll have like a Facebook page and maybe a rudimentary campaign website. And that's pretty much the extent of what they will do. But if you have like enough support within your community where you have people who are willing to go knock on doors, make your case on your behalf, and a small army of people willing to fight for you, those school board races and city council races, those are won and lost by the hundreds of votes. It is not a done deal. The group you were talking about, and I can't remember the name either, but the ones that really push for conservative Christians to run for city councils and school boards, I mean, I'm pretty sure this is what they tell those candidates. Like, they encourage pastors to run a lot. Why? You have a built-in army of volunteers and supporters. Use them. But I mean, this is true of any local community group. I mean, if you are known in your community for doing things, you have connections, you have people who are willing to sacrifice and spend some time on your behalf. And again, using a minuscule type of donations, you could get local advertising on Facebook or whatever you feel morally okay with.
Right.
But that's the thing. It's getting people excited and interested and who are aware of the issues and are not just running because they think it's a thing they need to do. It's because they actually care about the students or they care about the city, and they make that known. Because again, we are running out of places for people to find out objective information about these races. So it's just a matter of who can inspire turnout. And that's what those conservative Christians know how to do really well. It's getting everyone on board with some issue and running on it. And again, they might be fake issues, but they get you super riled up about it.
Yes.
So it's a matter of getting people to run. That's the first thing. But then getting people aware of this is why this person should win. And this is what's going to happen if they don't. And I know I've heard people like Stacey Abrams say this, but the hardest thing, you're not trying to convert the other side to your side. It is trying to get non-voters to just show up to a school board vote or put in their ballot, mail it in, do whatever. Trying to get the apathetic people to care about those local races. Like, this is a true story. In my community, during the 2020 election, I think, I actually reached out to a local progressive group, a Facebook group, and said, when it comes to like city council races or things like that, who should I be voting for like the most progressive seats? Because that's who I want to vote for. They could not immediately give me a slate of candidates to vote for. But I know if I asked like a local conservative Christian group, tell me to vote for, they would have had the PDF like ready to go and take with me to the ballot box. But that's what I mean. Like, they know how to get their people. They just tell you, I need you as a robot to do the following. And again, I've seen this. There are a lot of young atheists who are inspired and they want to be activists. And they have found that a better vehicle to do that is with a local political group, a local progressive group, rather than a local atheist group or secular student alliance group or something like that, because those are by definition not political. But again, it's a matter of, you don't need to win over people. You're not debating with people. You just need to have the manpower to get people to knock on doors and get people off their butts so that they'll vote in those races for you. And that is a surmountable challenge.
Yes. I said that Megs was going to get the last question, but Richard, go ahead.
Just real quick, is it Project Blitz, the group you're thinking of?
That wasn't the specific one, but yeah, Project Blitz is like the right-wing playbook for statewide and national legislation. Yeah, there is actually, I think, Richard, a different group that's pushing specifically for school boards, if not city council races, and that's the one that's eluding me right now. But it's been around. I mean, that sort of thing has been happening for such a long time, where it's getting right-wing conservatives interested in local office and running for local office or volunteering for someone to help them get elected. And that's part of the issue.
The group I was thinking of was QAnon. They said they are going to push for local school boards.
Right, which is not organized in any meaningful way. But again, they have a lot of adherents in a loose way, and they'll get people excited about it. So our battle is against apathy. It's not against those groups. It's against apathy, because most people, I think, when it comes to policy and helping school boards and pushing for sensible policies, I think they would be on our side with that, but it's really hard to get them to vote in those races. But this is what a small dedicated army can really do.
All right, thank you so much.
Yeah.
And just really always enjoy your talks. And
thank you all for coming. Thank you for your questions. I really appreciate it.
Thank everybody for coming. It's been quite a pleasure to see so many new people come to our group.
Yeah. Please
Our
join
Mark-
please join Atheists of Florida. Sign up for their list if you haven't done
Thank
so
you.
already. Donate if you can.
This is
Thank
our
you very
largest
much.
turnout by far.
Awesome.
And I've been advertising for you, your Patreon and all of that.
Thank you.
So support Hemant if you can too. So we need more people like him.
Oh, thank you. All right. Have a good
Thank
night,
you, Brad.
everybody.
He's talking about Citizens for Excellence in Education.
All right.
All right. Thank you all. We will see you in 2 weeks.
If you are pleased with our programs, please tap the like button and then subscribe to our channel. Don't forget the bell so you don't miss any notices of new material. We usually post new content every week. See our created playlists to discover events thus far this year, or to see a list of topics and speakers from our rapidly growing and diverse collection since 1992.